The next person, he's not in the guide. As you might have noticed, the guide sometimes isn't worth the paper it's written on. We just sort of move it along. But is a representative of Rio Tinto, very senior representative, who was effectively Rio's lead negotiator in the Gove mining agreement and put in 2 or 3 years of his life into that project. Prior to that was a very senior, if not the lead negotiator in the Argyle diamond mine, and probably lost 3 or 4 years of his life to that project. And currently, he's the lead negotiator or convener at Jabiru in relation to the Ranger and Jabiluka uranium mines, and I suspect if he hasn't lost a couple already, there's a few more years of your life to be lost there, Alan. Very experienced, very knowledgeable. Please welcome Alan Tietzel.
Thanks, folks. I'm not Don Henry. Don would probably be horrified that I'm standing up here in his time slot, but as a nod to Don, I'll theme my presentation around the ethics of agreement making. I do feel a bit humble and pretentious actually being up here in the shadow of all of the other speakers yesterday and this morning, but Marcy has asked me just to share some of the principles that I personally have learned and tried to apply to agreement making over the last apparently lost years of my life. Sometimes it does feel like that, but other times I've got to tell you it is an extremely satisfying opportunity that I've had. And I just hope that I've made some small difference, contributed to it, and when you look at a facility like this and you hear from the presenters yesterday, it is extremely encouraging. So I'm forever grateful for the opportunity that I have in this space. But we do hear a lot about the what and the how and the importance of engagement between landowners and mining companies. Increasingly it's good news, although we've obviously got a long way to go yet. What's not often discussed is the why of what is and what should be in mining agreements, and that has been touched on this morning, and Wayne and Kim have made some comments on that, along with Nigel. But I guess I want to sort of step back and just take a more of a high-level helicopter, perhaps philosophical approach, because it is smart business, but it's not sufficient that it's smart business. It is in many cases what is required by law, but it's not sufficient that we do what is required by law. It is most importantly the right thing to do. But what does that mean? What is the right thing to do? And making a statement of principle, it's the right thing to do, how does that guide the content, the terms of mining agreements and the process by which we negotiate those agreements? Mining people will often say that the most important principle is, and I agree, the most important principle is that we acknowledge that Aboriginal people are the owners of the land on which we mine. They are the landlords, we are the tenants. We acknowledge that they have cultural connection with country that goes back millennia, and that they are the first peoples of this nation. So if I were to venture an ethical framework for mining agreement making, for me at least, is without doubt the first principle. If you don't subscribe to that principle, you're off to a pretty bad start. That principle speaks partly to the need for mining agreement terms around the need for landowner approval and around the need for terms, for example, with respect to cultural heritage protection. As I say, it's very important, but it's not sufficient. Another principle is accepting the responsibility that we as miners have as fellow Australians and as tenants on Aboriginal land to help address social disadvantage in the communities that surround our operations, and particularly to assist through the economic opportunities that mining can provide. Excuse me. And you'll note that I've separated these two principles, the respect for First Peoples and addressing social disadvantage. They're both important, but they are different, and it's important that people don't conflate and confuse those two. There are terms in mining agreements that need to address both of those things, and I think if you want to get an excellent understanding of why the distinction between those two principles, you'd do very well to read Marcia's speech of last weekend, where she addresses those two principles as separate matters in another context. What I really want to cover this morning, and what is often overlooked, is the principle of sustainability. Now, there are more definitions of sustainability out there that you can poke a stick at, but for what it's worth, the one I subscribe to, with acknowledgement to a former mentor of mine, Brendan Hammond, who some of you may know or have heard of, is that the value of the asset that we create through mining must be equal or greater than the in situ value of the asset in the ground. A lot of words, let me read it again. The value of the asset we create through mining must be equal or greater than the in situ value of the asset in the ground. And that's to all stakeholders, not just the mining company, but particularly the landowners. We need to start from an acknowledgement that we as miners are extracting an asset from the ground which, once mined, will be gone forever. It is taken away from future generations. We do like to think that we transform the asset, and indeed we do, but we mainly think of transforming that asset as wealth creation, and you'll hear that again and again and again. It's a valid comment, but it is, again, not sufficient. In the mining industry, we talk about the value of reserves and resources, but what's often overlooked is the value of that asset in the ground to landowners, the value of the land itself that's being mined. So what we have to recognise in the mining industry and as a society is what is the value of that land to landowners and in particular to future generations. If not pursued wisely, mining today represents an opportunity cost to future generations. And in this I find some, and that's my phone ringing, and hopefully it's my kids ringing to wish me a belated Happy Father's Day. I'll ignore that. Oh, be quiet. This provides some ethical guidance, I think, in what are the fair and appropriate elements of a mining agreement. I think it's obvious these days that things like cultural heritage protection, environmental management are important. It's also obvious that there needs to be a financial component, and I agree with the point that Wayne was making that let's not call them royalties, let's just call them the financial benefits and steer away from this term royalties. I agree that they are a critically important component of mining agreements, and they need to be as generous as a mining company can possibly make them. But it's how that money is spent. And we've heard Melanie talk about the importance of trust, the ICDC, have I got that right, Melanie? Yep, the ICDC. And you know, I've worked with Wayne and I've worked with the NLC and Gumatch and Rirajingu people on establishing trusts, putting money into trusts that are designed for future generations. What's also important, of course, is education, training, and jobs. And I was very heartened to hear the presentations yesterday from people like Jawa, from Japari, from Dungal, from Graham, about how money and opportunity is being used to create sustainable communities. And I think the comments from Warren yesterday were very apt about he's had 3 generations of parents, grandparents, great-grandparents who've had a job, who've got up at 5 in the morning, etc., and that was normal for them. So one of the things that I know that landowners that I've worked with on the Argyle Agreement and the Gove Agreement were very concerned about is that we create this normal environment, the opportunity for jobs, for training. So they are critical elements of a mining agreement. Excuse me. So I think what's been a very positive experience for us here at Garma is to hear about how mining is able to contribute to enduring value, and I'm sure we're going to hear about that in a minute. But the other critical principle that I've learned over the years that's so important is the principle of agency. It's absolutely critical that landowners are the agents in creating that sustainable future. This is not something that mining companies do for Aboriginal people, or it's not something that governments beat mining companies around the head to do for Aboriginal people. Mining agreements must above all be a partnership in transforming the value of the minerals in the ground to some greater value for future generations. If we don't do that, we have stolen from landowners and we have stolen from future generations. I think Garma's contributed to this debate. It has in the past, it will in the future, and it's provided testimony to the importance and the benefits of moving forward together and creating a positive legacy for the future. And I know some of you have worked in this area like I have, and some of you indeed for many, many more years than I have. And these are probably obvious, bleedingly obvious statements. As simple as they might be, they are also profound. And putting principle into practice is bloody difficult. And I look around this forum today and I see people who I'm sure are like-minded around those principles and are doing the hard yakka of putting the principles into practice. So I particularly want to commend people like Jawa and Balapalu and Klaus and Sean and all the others who have provided this manifestation of the way forward. And Sean, thank you for the opportunity to present, and I hope I've not upset Don. Thanks, everyone.